It's not necessary to establish any kind of false equivalence between Islam and Christianity in order to rehabilitate Islam, as many of the problems that we identify with Islam are found almost exclusively in Northern Africa and the Middle East, whereas in Southeast Asia, where there are hundreds of millions of Muslims, these problems are largely absent. And they're also not unique to Islam. There are other countries in Northern Africa which are predominantly Christian, where we have similar rates of child marriage and restrictions on sexual freedom and the rights of women, which are some of the problems that we find so distasteful about certain variants of Islam. And even the most quintessential example of Islamic terrorism, the suicide bombing, is primarily a Palestinian thing rather than a general Muslim thing. Until relatively recently, it was more the Palestinians who were doing this than anybody else. And the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was founded by a Palestinian Christian and has become one of the biggest terrorist organizations in the Palestinian territories, and Palestinian Christians have carried out, to the best of my knowledge, some suicide attacks. So it's not just a religious issue. There are cultural, contextual, historical issues at play that we have to take into account. Islam is an incredibly diverse religion of some 1.7 billion people, with about 1400 years of history, throughout which it's gone through different periods of relative secularism, relative openness, also relative radicalization, conservatism, aggression. It's waged wars of conquest. And there have been times that it's more aggressive than it is today. There have been times when it's been more peaceful and more open than it is today. Not quite like the modern secular West, but still, compared to other empires of the time, Islam, the Islamic world, had been more open. Even recently there have been significant changes. For instance, prior to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran was a much more open society, much more modern in many ways. The same thing has happened with the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan. You can see those before and after photos of Kabul in the 1950s, I think, compared to how it is today, how developed it was back then, and then the same photos of the same places in Kabul now destroyed, how broken the city seems. Same thing's happening with the rise of Wahhabi Islam being exported from Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are empowered by oil money and Western contracts, and they have formed this unholy alliance with the Wahhabis to keep their population quiet. Not that the Saudi family are, devout themselves, but they had to do this because they're afraid of the Shiite theocracy coming out of Iran. So these are specific schools of thought within Islam rather than being representative of the religion as a whole or reflective of its core essence. So I'm not saying that it's all just down to Western imperialism and foreign intervention. So Sam Harris, he says, liberals pretend like there are no monsters in the world beyond those which we have created for ourselves. And I see these monsters. I see the evil of certain strains of Islam. And I'm not saying that the West is uniquely evil, like many people say that. It's not. The West is uniquely powerful. Every civilization has attempted to wage wars of conquest and the expansion of its own interests. The West has just been uniquely successful at this. But this doesn't mean that we're inherently superior either. Our supremacy, just like the problems that we have identified with certain variants of Islam, is historically contingent. There have only been two periods in our history when the West has been on top. There's today, the period from the Enlightenment, and then there was the ancient world of the Roman Empire and the Hellenic world. And between these periods, China was the world's foremost global power. And the Islamic Empire, the Islamic world, flourished in that period. They didn't just hand us back knowledge that they had inherited from Aristotle. They developed all kinds of stuff: algebra, astronomy, engineering. They developed the crankshaft in the 12th century, all kinds of innovations in medical science. So what has made us so powerful hasn't just been our Christian heritage, it's cross-cultural contact. So our Christian ideals, our Christian heritage, is a critical component of what makes us who we are. Prior to the colonization of the Americas, the New World, we didn't really talk about Europe, we talked about Christendom as being what made us who we are. And now we talk about the West. So Christianity and the development of Christian scholarship sowed the seeds of its own destruction. It allowed for secularization. And we do owe more to Christian scholarship than we do to the ancients, even though Christopher Hitchens thought that the ideals of Socrates and Aristotle and Plato were a superior tradition on which to found the Western identity. He thought it was superior to Jesus Christ and the Bible and Christian scholarship. Still, the study of the Bible and theological discussion in Christian universities is what has really given birth to the modern world of academic scholarship, peer review, academic dialogue, publishing, science, all this kind of stuff is really an evolution of the system of Christian scholarship. The ancient universities like Oxford were primarily training grounds for the clergy who had to be literate, and this discussion of theology allowed for an opening, and the establishment of a clergy allowed for an opening and a secularization of Western civilization. But it's not just our Christian heritage. These impulses towards egalitarianism, they're a universal human characteristic, and there's another one, a hierarchical instinct. It's the egalitarian revolution that separates us from the great apes, but within each of us, universal aspects of human nature are competing. One towards fairness and justice and openness, and one towards hierarchy, seeking status, pushing others down. And there's one of these that we need to emphasize. If we truly believe that our ideals are superior, that our values are real and true, then we should value cross-cultural contact and not be like those Muslims that we see who restrict free speech, and those, liberal, leftist, feminists who want to restrict free speech. It seems like an unholy alliance between them, but it's more complicated, and we don't really have time to go into it. All I'm saying is that we need to favor cross-cultural contact as what's enriched us, and as what will enrich the Islamic world. By connecting with them more fully, by trading with them, by allowing the open exchange of ideas and of people, we will empower ordinary Muslims. We will allow the Islamic world to go through an evolution. By seeing them as different from us, by surrendering to the out-group homogeneity bias and saying, no, we have no place for them in our world, we're just going to make them separate from us and evolve independently. What we need is more contact, more openness that will strengthen both the West and the Islamic world.